Why don't facts ever get us anywhere when it comes to political discourse? I think facts are overrated. On the one hand, the issue here is that obviously we often speak before really being properly informed, so without really knowing what's going on the ground. This is certainly the case. But even if we were to be properly informed about what is going on the ground, so what is in other words visible, what could be recorded with a video camera if we were to put it there, even if we had that data available and were all up to date and informed, facts would still not matter. They would still be overrated. Because think about what the major issues of disagreement are. They are not about proper brute facts, about what exactly happened on a specific event or what a specific video camera recorded. So, what's the visible stuff that happened? But basically, all of the conflicts arising, for example, in the political discourse in the US and abroad as well, arise from differing interpretations of what is actually going on. They are not about visible events, but about what those visible events mean. For example, Jimmy Kimmel uttered the sentence that MAGA was blaming the assassination of Charlie Kirk on everybody else but themselves. Now, this statement, if you take its literal meaning, AI would respond that it basically means that MAGA was using the event, it was systematically not even considering that the radicalization part might have anything to do with them. So the issue here is that both camps read the same statement, so were confronted with the same factual reality, yet both camps interpreted it in entirely different ways. So what matters here is that are the intentions that we assume behind a person's speech. So when Jimmy Kimmel uttered those words, what was he intending to convey as a message? For the right, it was obvious that the intended message was to basically blame it all on MAGA. For the Democratic side, it was not so evident. A chunk of it interpreted it literally as meaning that MAGA is blaming everybody else but themselves in advance and using it um, for political purpose. Another part interpreted it as the Republicans did. In any case, what matters here is the actual intention. The intention is that which is defining, and how you interpret something to be the actual intention depends on your frame, it depends on your background, it depends basically on which side of the argument you are on, it depends on which tribal associations you have already established. Because this is what it means to be part of a tribe. Being a part of a tribe is not a physical fact, it's not something about how your brain is connected to other people's brains, but it is feeling identified with and being part of a symbolic structure, of a structure of symbols and reference and meanings that you take for granted and use to interpret reality. Once you've taken that position, once you've taken a tribal position, for you intentions will be very, very easy to read because you will complete, whenever someone makes a partial statement, you will be able to complete that statement coming from your own perspective, of course, and reading it from your own perspective. You will be able to interpret situations in which you have even very, very small clues, right? Objectively looking at them, it might just be a single word, and you will already place that word in a certain context and know, oh, this is a friend or this is a foe. The same thing with Trump's utterance shortly after the assassination attempt on him, when he shouted something on the lines of fight, 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 or win, win, win. I can't remember. For example, this again, if you just describe the objective facts about what happened, it would be meaningless because the point is you have to be able to interpret what his intentions are in the specific situation. Now, for Republicans, many I guess, his gesture was one of motivation. He wanted to keep people together. Well, if you were to ask Democrats, for Democrats, his gesture was one which blamed them. Without even having known anything about the assassin, by making the gesture and explaining fight, 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 he already made the assumption that the Democrats are behind the thing. So it was not a fight for winning a soccer game, obviously, for the Democrats, but it was basically also not justified about, hey, let's win the election, but it was a tribal it was a tribal call to fighting, literally fighting your opponent, right? So the action of somebody trying to assassinate him was immediately linked to the opponent's side and taken to be the result of the opponent's actions. This is how Democrats largely interpreted his words. And in this vein, they regarded them not only as just an expression of, hey, I'm still here, I'm motivated, let's do this together, but rather as an expression, fight against your enemies, and your enemies are the Democrats because they just tried to kill me, right? In all of those examples, and you can come up with, take the insurrection, for example, on January 6th. To some people, it's not an insurrection. What's the difference? The difference is, again, intentions. Why were those people there? What did they want to do? Depending on which camp you're coming from, you will have entirely different readings of the factual situation. You can come up with as many examples if you want, but basically, I think almost all events that matter have this about themselves. They are open to interpretation, and depending on which tribe you're coming from, your interpretations will be entirely different. And that's the issue with tribes. Tribes, by definition, don't have a universal perspective. Tribes, by definition, by virtue of being a tribe, have a perspective which includes primarily the interests of those who belong to the tribe. It is, again, by definition, you can't have a tribe which has a universal perspective on everything and includes everybody in all possible regards. This is a fiction that I think has never been realized in humanity so far. A tribe, by definition, has a symbolic structure which uses certain ideas, certain words, and not others. It is by definition exclusory. It has to be distinguishable from a different tribal language. You can't have a tribe which has all possible tribal languages included in itself, in using all possible tribal languages. This is not how it works. It would be as if, or similar to the case when you had a tribe and you had a flag, and that flag contains all the other possible flags that are out there. This is not how it works. This is not how social reality works. And for us, the basic conundrum now is that if we don't want to fold the entire thing into purely tribal dynamics, because in purely tribal dynamics, reality doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is the symbolism, sharing a symbolic space, and you can come up with endlessly many different ways of structuring that symbolic space. You can invent things, you can reinterpret events. I mean, history is full of extremely interesting, actually, examples of how endless human creativity becomes once it has chosen a tribal side. Once we do that, there are absolutely no limits to our imagination. It's basically like storytelling. You can come up with any kind of story. There are absolutely no limitations on your storytelling. And the same thing is true that once we identify with a tribal perspective, our perspectives are not limited anymore by reality. We can take any real situation and interpret it and bend it in all possible ways. And there is no way out of this by reference to reality, or by reference to facts, or by reference to let's get all informed about what the issues actually are. This won't get us anywhere. The only way we can get out of that is, first of all, if people are willing and if people want to get out of that. If your choice is, I want to be tribal and I want to linger in my tribal experience and I enjoy it, I enjoy the hatred, I enjoy the polarization. It makes me feel like someone. It makes me feel good because I have a purpose. I know I know what to do. My emotional space is actually directed towards something for the first time in my life, right? Because this is what tribal experience gives you. It gives you direction. Oftentimes people get out of depression when they discover the tribal, and the tribal functions like something that's regulating their emotion. They were not capable of regulating their emotions, and suddenly they can regulate their emotions thanks to the tribal. It functions very similar to fear. People who have never been in a actual situation of fear their entire lives and have suffered from depression, when really facing existential threat, real danger, suddenly know what to do. Suddenly they are capable of regulating their emotions, and depression isn't an issue anymore, at least for this short period of time. So if people choose to stay in the tribal, if they're fine with this experience, I think I'm not sure there's any way out of that. I think this is just like smoking. It's like many other forms of addiction. It has an aspect of addiction, by the way. You have to choose to not want to be in that state. And if you don't choose that, I don't think anyone can do anything. Nobody can prove anything to you because everything's open ended, and you can come up with any kind of rationalization. As we've experienced it with, for example, alcoholics, I have personal experience with alcoholics. You cannot reason with them. You cannot make reference to reality because they have endlessly many different ways in which they can come up with excuses and re-rationalizations. I think that this is something many of us have experienced. And funnily enough, we're experiencing this now on a collective level. It's not just personal and individual anymore, but entire collectives are not willing to get out of their addictive experience of the tribal mind, which feels from within really great. But you have to be aware of the consequences of that. And this is pretty similar to addiction in general. Addiction doesn't necessarily feel bad while you're in the experience itself. It's limiting, yeah, but it doesn't really feel like you're doing something evil. But once you become aware of the consequences, the whole thing changes. So that's the thing. I mean, if you want to stay with it and stay in this experience, there's no way of getting out of it. In fact, even if you choose to get out of that experience, of the tribal experience, and you feel uncomfortable in it because you feel like it's limiting your humanity, it feels like it's just partially being you. This is not who you really are. This is just a part of you, and not you as your entire self, what your entire self is capable of. Even if you make that choice, very much like someone who's addicted and makes a choice to change something, by reference of reality or facts, you won't be able to make a real change. The real change would happen if you have chosen to change, to get out of the tribal experience, and if you have consciously chosen to embrace the other side and not see the other side as a tribal expression, but to meet other persons as individuals. I think there's no other way around that. Or you have to go all the way, right? Go through the entire tribal experience, which usually is resolved and it comes in cycles, but the resolution is usually warfare and suffering and other destruction. And after this has been experienced, and after people have gone through that, they start shifting their minds. When people have been utterly destroyed, they start to depolarize, and tensions become lower again. And unfortunately, this is the typical way it usually goes. On a collective level, mostly I think it goes this way. On a personal level, often, I think, as well. You have to be utterly destroyed to actually figure out that this is not what you want, and this is not the state that you want to be in.